Welcome to today's BC Rural Center webinar on affordable rural housing. My name is Randy Morse. I'm the Communications Director for the BC Rural Center. The BC Rural Center is a nonprofit dedicated to providing rural British Columbians and First Nations members with timely, useful information on subjects of importance to those of us who live, work, and in some cases govern in rural municipalities, regional districts, and First Nations. Providing affordable, place-appropriate rural housing is both a challenge and a pressing need in rural and remote communities across North America. There are different approaches that can be taken to address this issue, dependent upon the type of housing being considered, target demographics, and local conditions. Today, our two presenters are going to focus on community land trusts, land leases, and shared equity home ownership, all designed to facilitate the provision of permanently affordable housing in our rural communities. Our first speaker, Lisa Byers, has been Executive Director of the OPAL, which stands for Of Land and People, Community Land Trust on Washington State's Orcas Island since January 1996. Lisa is OPAL's only full-time staff person. Prior to working for OPAL, she served as land steward for the San Juan County Land Bank and for 10 years as a land and property manager for the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities, now known as Historic New England, based in Boston, Massachusetts. Lisa has an undergraduate degree from Vassar College and an MBA in Public and Nonprofit Management from Boston University. In 2006, she was elected to serve as the first president of the National Community Land Trust Network and was awarded the Friend of Housing Award from the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. We're delighted to welcome Lisa today. Enjoy her presentation. Lisa, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Randy. So I need to share screen, right?
Correct.
Looks like you have to stop sharing your screen for me to share my screen.
I believe I've just done that.
Okay. Great. So hello out there in Cyberland. This is Lisa Byers, and what I would like to do today is give you a little introduction to OPAL Community Land Trust, the work that we've done here, and then zoom out a little bit and talk about how the community land trust model works to deliver permanently affordable home ownership. First, to orient us all in the world a little bit, Orcas Island is just a stone's throw away from the Canadian border in the San Juan Islands of Washington State. We are a community of about 5,000 people year-round, and our population does swell in the summertime. Some estimates are by as much as 3 times that, sometimes 4 times that on very busy weekends. The median home price is upwards of $500,000. We've just about recovered from the boom bust cycle that occurred over the last 10 years and are getting back up into the mid 500s with median home prices now. Our median income is around $67,000, and we are one of the counties that in the nation, in the US, that has the highest amount of its income from what is called unearned sources. So investments, income, passive sources. In other words, we have a high percentage of our populace that are retired and living off of their retirement savings. So our average wages, in contrast to that median income figure, is around $30,000. And this is something that many rural communities are discovering, that tourist-based, service-based economies have wages that are generally much lower than natural resource-based wages, such as logging and fishing, and definitely lower wages than manufacturing. So OPAL got started in the late 1980s, officially incorporated in 1989. And for the first 4 years, it was an all-volunteer effort. And then hired its first executive director and started down the journey to where we are today, which is over the course of our 27 or so years, we have housed actually more than 203 families, because in our rental apartments, apartments do turn over, but we have 104 ownership homes, and of those 104, 69 times somebody has bought a house that somebody else had previously purchased, previously owned. So we've gone through a resale of that house, and I'll talk about how that works later on. We have also either developed or purchased rental housing, and we've applied the Community Land Trust form of ownership also to having some office space that is available for another nonprofit organization as well as smaller businesses, and we have some community gardens. So here you can see kind of the trajectory of our growth roughly in 5-year increments. The burgundy color is the number of homes that we added to our portfolio. The green color is the number of those homes that were then resold to new owners. And the peachy color is when we have added rental homes. So a quick little tour just to give you a sense of what our housing looks like. We are rural in our approach. When we build new neighborhoods from scratch, we will buy a piece of land, subdivide it, and design the site plan and also the architectural design of the buildings. We tend to go for low impact development in our designs, keeping cars clustered to the outer edges of the building area, and then allowing people to walk into walking paths. So it's not a typical suburban design with paved roads and garages. Matter of fact, we have not built any garages, and that is in large part due to our temperate climate. So Opal Commons is the first neighborhood, finished in 1994. And then we'll just kind of amble along here. Our pace has generally been that it takes about 5 years to do a big project. That is, we will, everything from conception to buying the piece of land to then designing, installing the site utilities, and constructing the buildings and selling the homes. And we've done a variety of different methodologies. Those first two neighborhoods that you saw were stick-built on site. This neighborhood was done through manufactured housing. The buildings were actually manufactured in Rathron, Idaho, and shipped over. And that's because at this particular point in time, the building business on the island was just booming, and we couldn't get the attention of a contractor who would build for us at a price that made any sense. And so we did a cost comparison, and at that point in time, doing modular housing shipped in was a more cost-effective approach. Then we returned to stick-built building just a few years later for another little cluster of homes. In this instance, a local nonprofit made a discount sale to us for a piece of land where we subdivided and built. And these were buildings that are all the same footprint. They're each 880 square feet, but there's no structural walls inside. And so everything is load-bearing structural to the outside, which means the interior walls can be moved around very easily. And of the 6 homes, we've got people who are living in them. One's a studio, a couple of them are 1-bedrooms, and a few of them are 2-bedrooms. Our largest ownership neighborhood to date is the Wild Rose Meadow neighborhood, which got completed about 7 years ago. There are 34 homes in that neighborhood, 32 of which are Community Land Trust homes, and 2 of which are fee simple. This was an instance where we partnered with the owner of the property who owned the entire property in fee simple, and we worked out a sort of negotiation for in exchange for him getting an extra lot that he could then sell for profit. He sold the rest of the land, the 7 acres, to us at a bargain price. So there are 2 lots in this neighborhood that are fee simple, and the other 32 are Community Land Trust resale restricted homes. And I wanted to include a picture with some snow in it, just so you know that we do get a little bit of snow here on occasion, even though we do have a Mediterranean temperate climate here. Then we also have 15 homes that are scattered sites or that we have moved. These have come to us in a variety of different ways. We started doing scattered sites by actually purchasing existing homes and using some grant funding to lower the price of the home to make it affordable. In the building at the lower right is actually a structure that was donated to us outright. The individual was great. I'd never seen him before. He walked into our office one day and he says, "I think I'm going to make your day," and announced that he wanted to donate his house to us. Now, it's always good to check out anything that sounds good. And in fact, this house did require a lot of work. We had to put in about $110,000 worth of work into the building. But nevertheless, having been gifted it outright, that ended up being a very good deal. And as I said, we also have moved buildings. This is one of the advantages of being on an island, that it is easy for barges to bring buildings throughout the Salish Sea. And a number of the buildings have actually come from other locations on the island. The house in the upper left, yes, I'm getting my lefts and rights correct. In the upper left is a house that was out on the eastern side of the island, and it was actually built in the 1910s. And then we moved it around and brought it to the North Shore and put it on a piece of property in our main village called East Sound. The other building that you see is coming down kind of a large hill on the island called Buck Mountain. That's about 1,000 square foot building, and that was only 12 years old when the owners purchased it and decided that they wanted to do something different with that land, and trying to renovate around this house was less cost effective for them than just having us take it, and they built a new house. So we've done 10 house moves altogether. That occurred for us at a point in time when that was the most economical thing to do. Economics seem to have shifted a little bit on that for a variety of reasons. And so we always are nimble and responsive to what's actually happening in the marketplace, knowing that markets change over time, and so our approach needs to change as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've also done some rental housing. Here you see images of our 2 rental project locations. One of them in the upper left is a combination office and rental housing that we constructed, and there are 7 apartments there. And then we purchased an existing multifamily rental housing project and from a private developer, and purchased that so that we could perpetuate affordability. In the works, things that we're currently working on is our largest development to date, and it is designed to be 45 townhomes on property right in our village of East Sound. This will be the first time that we're using a federal program in the States called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And then a new program for us called the Island Loan Fund, where we will be doing social impact using capital invested in our organization from social impact investors to provide short-term mortgage loans for credit-worthy individuals who can't get a bank loan. There's a long history of that in our community, and I think in a lot of rural communities where, in our case, there are individuals who've made loans to mostly young people who either have too much student debt or don't have enough of a credit history yet, or have a new job, a new self-employment business that doesn't have the track record yet that enables them to get bank financing. So that's one set of scenarios of folks we're trying to serve. And another is individuals who are purchasing properties where the property doesn't meet the bank standards. So for instance, our first likely borrower from this program will be somebody buying a house that was owner builder, which is a variance of the building code here, allowing people to build their own homes. But the house has been around for about 15 years, but was always on never had a septic system. And so the bank won't make a loan on it. So we're working with the borrower. We'll give them a loan. During the 5 years that they have a loan with us, they will install a septic system, and then they'll refinance with a bank. So this is a product where, again, because we're looking at social impact investing, the loans will be short-term, and our job will be to move the borrower from being unbankable to bankable during the 4, 5, or maybe 6 years that they have a loan with us. So this is an image of Orcas Island, and it is a horseshoe-shaped island. It's about 60 square miles, and one of the challenges we always have in is trying to demonstrate to people the impact of the work that we do. Over time, when people live in their OPAL homes, they're just part of the community, and people are sort of none the wiser. So we came up, this is a photograph of actually a fairly large panel that is an aerial photograph of the island, and each of these placards, sort of with a yellow band on it, shows you the location of the neighborhoods that we've created, or in some cases just single moved houses. And one of the things that we've tried to do is make sure that we do have some geographic spread throughout the island. So we do have some housing on the west side, down near Lahari Ridge, and we do have some on the east side, but most of our housing is in what's called our village of East Sound, and in Washington State lexicon, it's called the urban growth area. It's where we, as a community, have decided we want more density, which means de facto that the land is a little bit less expensive in the village than it is elsewhere. So this helps people visualize, the number of houses. And then we also like to let people know who lives in our homes, because really the story of affordable housing is about one of interdependence, that we need the people who need affordable housing. So we asked each of our residents to tell us what their current work was, and we inventoried that. And at that time, out of the, well, there were something, we think we had 125 respondents at that time, and they held 175 jobs. And we then took another aerial view of our village of East Sound and put those stars right in the location where those individuals worked. So this is the village of East Sound, which really has 2 north-south streets and 2 east-west streets. It's a pretty small place, but you can see that there are OPAL residents who are working all throughout the whole village, and at the senior center and at the school, and at a couple of the other, we have a couple of private schools and childcare centers, at the medical center. So this was our effort to illustrate the impact, and it's proved to be actually a very powerful tool, visual graphic in person.
Lisa?
Yes?
A quick question. What is the size of East Sound, and what sort of municipal government do you have? Is there one for the village itself, or do you have
the village does not have a municipal government. We are by that urban growth area boundary that I talked is about 2,000. So about 2,000 of the 5,000 people who live year-round on the island live in the village of East Sound. Okay. So I'm going to zoom out now, and now that you've gotten a little sense of what the work looks like on the ground in our instance, I want to talk a little bit more broadly about why you would want to have a community land trust in your community. And there are three main categories of reasons that I think it's good to look at them, a lens to look at this through. One is that there are public policy goals. So if you're a government official or an elected official, there are reasons why you would want to pursue this strategy. If you're a community member who cares about the community and wants to retain aspects of the community that you love, likewise, there are good reasons. And then for individuals, there are good reasons to pursue this. So first, the public policy goals. If you are in a place where you want to promote having individuals in your community who have a long-term stake in the community, and I don't know, I think there's a little bit of a cultural difference here between Canada and the US, but in the US, home ownership is viewed as, well, there's a, it's the American dream is one of the stereotypes of it. We have about a 64% home ownership rate in this country. And it is viewed in our world as the way that you can assure stability, that rental housing generally is subject to the whims of the landlord, and landlords change their minds. And that's in fact a big dynamic of why we pursued home ownership first here on Orcas, because so many individuals were finding that landlords didn't want to rent their homes year round. They wanted to either leave the home vacant for 9 months and have it available to themselves for 3 months, or they wanted to have the guest house available in the summer. So a very common occurrence here is that people could have stable, affordable housing for 8 or 9 months out of the year, but then be without a home over the summertime. So as a public policy goal, if you want to promote stability, if you want to revitalize a neighborhood that perhaps has been historically disinvested or has a long history of multi-generational occupancy and is then threatened by gentrification, the Community Land Trust can be a way to secure that land and assure that that cultural heritage is retained in that community. There is a video here on this slide that I'm not going to show, but if we turn this into a PDF and send it around or post it later on, folks can click on that link. And what this particular video does is illustrate the value of the Community Land Trust model in terms of how it benefits multiple homeowners over successive generations. And I will also show you some of that in a more specific way about OPAL coming up. So as a community member, the Community Land Trust has a benefit in that it's not a public agency. Generally, it can be a part of government, but in general, we find in the States that even if a government starts a Community Land Trust, it then evolves out into becoming a nonprofit organization. So it's membership-based, and it is controlled and run by a board that represents the community. Its mission is to hold land for the common good. So while, as I referred to earlier, the majority, most of the time that's for affordable housing, because we have, in the States at least, found a business model where we can generate more and more affordable housing. It can also be held for other community purposes. As I mentioned, we have offices on our Community Land Trust land, some community gardens. In other community land trusts around the country, they have provided space for social service organizations. Sometimes it's a way to bring a grocery store into a community that has could be considered a food desert. So it's a way for a local community to sort of have some self-determination about how land is used in its community. And then for individuals, there is a real benefit in Community Land Trust home ownership, in that certainly it provides that stability that I referred to in the States, definitely more so than rental housing. That the Community Land Trust as an organization is there as a partner with the homeowner. So the homeowner is not cast off to themselves after they purchase the home. We as the Community Land Trust have a role that we call being a steward. We are a steward both for the homes and the land that we own and the homes that are on that land, and for the individuals. And so we provide ongoing financial support if people need it. You know, we're hands off if they don't want us, but if they want us, we're here to help. And as individuals, you get a fair return on your equity. Our model is a very small amount of money to get in. It's not even really what I would call a down payment. You're paying some of the closing costs in order to get in. And as you'll see later, the return is definitely better than it would be if you were to take that money and invest it even in the stock market or in a more stable investment. And finally, as an individual, you can also leave your home to whomever it is that you wish to lead it to. It has that same, you have that same part of the bundle of property rights as a traditional homeowner would have. So the mission of the Community Land Trust is to own and steward land for the common good in perpetuity. And the in perpetuity piece is something that often gives people a little bit of pause. As I often say, I don't really know how long that is. I just know it's a really, really long time. And so it could be that during the time that the Community Land Trust owns the land, maybe in 100-year segment of time, affordable housing is the best use, and maybe in another 100-year segment of time, that purpose changes. Who's to know? But the community is able to make that self-determination, not landlords or individuals who wish to gain on the real estate over time. So in the States, community land trusts are which are recognized in our tax code as being not-for-profit 501c3, and that's basically a charitable organization. The organizations have a membership, people who from the community support the work of the organization, and they have certain voting rights. Most definitively, they can vote in or vote out board members. And another power that most commonly is given to members is the ability, actually the requirement, that members have to vote on the sale of land. And in our bylaws, for instance, it clearly states that the sale of land contradicts the purpose of our organization and shall not occur except in extreme circumstances. The Board of Trustees or the Board of Directors is designed to represent three different constituents. There are individuals who represent the public agencies of that community, other individuals who represent just the community itself, and then the third part of the board are individuals who are themselves low income, represent low income, or are homeowners or tenants of the organization. And the reasoning behind this structure is that we don't ever want to become an organization that believes that we know best what to do for those people. We always want to have individuals who are the beneficiaries of the work that we do at the table, helping us make decisions. And I have been struck by how much better we are at making decisions because of this structure. And the other piece that I'll throw in here is that we as an organization operate by consensus. Not all community land trusts do, but we do. And one of the things that I find so beautiful about this is that we have a number of board members who have been very economically successful in life. They've worked for large corporations or businesses. And then they come and they come sit on our board, and we have homeowners who've never been on a board before. By operating by consensus, we level the playing field, and people who are used to having power and being in situations of governance learn to equalize, and likewise individuals who've not had as much experience about being on a board learn how to participate. And we value all voices, knowing that each person really does have a piece of the truth that helps us to make better decisions. So community land trusts are also, by definition, place-based organizations. They have a defined service area. The membership is from that service area. The The board of trustees is elected from that community. So the orientation really is towards, we love about this place, we care about this place, we know this place, and we want to do what we think is best for this place, in essence, sort of filling in the gaps of need and providing services that the traditional market is not meeting. And as I've said before, there is a commitment in the design of community land trusts for perpetual affordability, which of course means perpetual responsibility, which means that it's really important to set your organization up for success and to be a sustainable business. It is a nonprofit business, a charitable business, but it is nonetheless a business. So there are a variety of different ways in which community land trusts in the states have gotten started. Some have been sponsored by governments, so for instance, the city of Chicago did a study and was kind of frustrated by its previous affordable housing production and scanned the landscape to understand what types of housing programs were out there, and came to understand that community land trusts, in their estimation, along with many others, does the best job of perpetuating the public dollar and getting the most bang for the buck. So they started a community land trust and decided to actually keep it still within the confines of the government. So the pro is that there's some financial support, there's often staffing support right from the start, and you can maybe take umbrage with this, but there is some legitimacy that comes with being part of government. The downside is you may be in the political favoring in one set of years, and then all of a sudden be on the outs in another set of years. So that it can be kind of rocky if the politics changes, and it's much harder then to have that kind of grassroots swelling from a membership or from individuals. Folks really kind of take it that it's part of the city bureaucracy and there's top-down decision making. The other example is nonprofit sponsorship, which is what my organization did and many others around the states, where it was a group of community folks who sat around and said, we've got a problem, how are we going to fix it? Let's start a nonprofit organization and get it going. So, good side of that is you can get started fairly quickly. Sometimes it's a little bit challenging. People may not take you as seriously as a nonprofit to start with, but you have much more flexibility and creativity as time goes on. Yet a third variation of this is demonstrated by Proud Ground in Portland, Oregon. They were actually sponsored by government, but then spun off and are now a separate nonprofit organization. So community land trust houses can come in all different shapes and sizes and actually legal configurations. As you saw in our portfolio, there are scattered site programs. They can be condominiums. In that case, rather than using a tool of the ground lease, which I'll introduce to you in a minute, they would use a deed restriction. There can be produced by new construction or by buying existing houses. They can be structured as co-ops on top of community land trust land. Our sister community land trust here in the San Juan Islands on Lopez Island does all self-help construction, where the future owners help to build the houses, and they cluster of homes, even though they look like single-family dwellings, are part of a co-op. And you could have co-housing, and of course they can be rural, urban, suburban, located in any location. So at the root of why we create the community land trust and why we have a housing affordability problem is that there is an affordability gap between the cost of real estate and the incomes that people have. So one can try and close that gap by increasing people's incomes, or you can try to reduce the housing costs, or what seems to be the solution that most governmental entities have come up with, since they can't seem to influence either of those two market areas of wages or housing costs, is to come up with subsidies to pay the difference, to cover the cost of the difference. And community land trusts use subsidies to reduce the cost and to control the housing cost into the future. And in most instances, what community land trusts are trying to do and are achieving, and we certainly are achieving this where we are, is to keep the price of housing correlated and on parallel with wages, so that the working people in our community can continue to live and work in our community. So we achieve, we secure those subsidies in the states from a variety of different sources. Our federal government is still in the housing business a bit, but they've been retreating ever since the 80s, and that has become more and more, both more difficult and smaller in size over time. States around the country have picked up the mantle, and in our state of Washington, beginning in the mid-1990s, we have a state housing trust fund that provides grants and low interest rate loans for the development of both home ownership and rental housing. And then towns and cities are increasingly getting into this issue because they're right there on the front lines where they see the affordable housing problem. And so larger cities started a couple of decades ago, starting to impose a variety of different kinds of taxes. And now we're seeing smaller jurisdictions. And so for instance, here in Washington, a couple of years ago, the city of Bellingham, which is just south of the border, adopted a sales tax in support of affordable housing. Two other small cities, Seattle has for quite some time. And here in San Juan County, we are going to be taking a run, we hope later this year, at a real estate excise tax that would support affordable housing. Then at the local level, groups also use density bonuses or inclusionary zoning as a way to have the private sector developer participate by saying, if you produce affordable housing on that piece of land, you can produce at a higher density than you would have if you didn't provide affordable housing. And then there's private funding as well. And in our community, one of the other statistics about San Juan County is that we are the county in the United States with the 10th highest level of income inequality. So that is both a good thing and a bad thing. And the good part about it is that when we can tap into the wealth of those folks at the higher end, we can, in a way, play Robin Hood and recycle that money down and to help other individuals. So we've been fairly successful with our private fundraising. So here's how the model works. The theory is that you're taking the bundle of sticks of property rights that are usually bound together, which is the land and the building, and you're splitting them up. And the individual owns the house and a leasehold interest in the land, and the community land trust owns the land. And the reason we do that is so that the community land trust, through the lease to the land for the individual to own their home on that land, can take a few of those sticks of property rights in order to further the mission of providing housing for the long term. So the lease is long term. It is generally 99 years with an ability to extend for a second 99-year term. And it is balanced. The idea is that we are striving to retain community value at the same time that we also want the homeowner to gain some wealth and security themselves. And then the lease is inheritable. So it is possible to pass the structure on to your family members. In our instance, different community land trusts do this differently, but in OPAL, the leasehold interest is inheritable, but we then say if you inherit it, you have to abide by the terms of the lease, which include 9 months residency in the structure and having it be your primary residence. So we're not interested in having our CLT housing used as a vacation home or as a source of income for somebody else. The design is that this is housing for people who are living and working or retired in our community. So the lease does define that it is only for residential use, except in the instances where it's for office use, but that it is owner occupancy. And we charge a lease fee that is designed not to provide any return to us for the land. We use subsidies to buy the land, so there's no ongoing debt service, and that's a critical part of this, is that you don't want to get into a situation where the CLT is having to pay debt service on the land that it owns. But the lease fee does cover the costs to the Community Land Trust for taxes on the property, insurance to make sure that you're covered, and a fee. In our instance, the management fee is, I think we're at $32 right now per month. And that is designed to help provide a source of revenue to us as an organization to make sure that we're here to provide those sorts of support services and to facilitate resales. I'll kind of skip over this a little bit. I'm going to get into the resale price and the resale formula here in just a minute. There are 3 different types of resale formulas. The one that is the most common throughout the states is appraisal-based, and that says that we will look at what the appraised market value of your property that you purchased with the CLT was when you purchased it, and the appraised price when you sell it, and you as the homeowner can take out of it, 1, what you put into it, so whatever down payment you put in, 2, whatever you have paid down on your mortgage, 3, the value of any improvements that you've made to the structure, and then 4, generally it's about 25% of the increase in the value. So that's one type of resale formula. Another type is any sort of range of indexes. In the States, we've got the Consumer Price Index, which varies by geographic region. One can argue whether or not that accurately reflects the current trends in costs. Another index is the median income, which as I've said, could in instances as ours be somewhat flawed because it might track more with people's retirement income than it does with wage income. And then a third type of resale formula is actually just to have a set fixed percentage. We've actually just migrated to that after having an indexed formula for a number of versions of our ground lease, and based on our analysis of our marketplace, we set that percentage at 1.875% per year. Different folks have different markets and make that determination based on what's going on in their market. And I think that's really one thing I want to underscore is that when doing it, there is an art and a science to choosing the resale formula that works best for you. And in fact, our national association, the Grounded Solutions Network, has a whole course that they offer on how to determine what resale formula is going to best meet your goals in your community based on the economics of your community. So Grounded Solutions Network does have a model lease that has been honed and developed over 30 years. I think it is actually the 3rd version of a model lease. And of course, it's based on US law, but there's probably a lot of good things that can be borrowed from that. It's designed to protect both parties. And as I said, 99 years and renewable, a very long time. So I did mention earlier that in some instances, such as condominiums, instead of using a ground lease, there is the option of doing a deed restriction. Now, in general, deed restrictions are not quite as durable as a ground lease. There's nothing in our sort of common law heritage that has quite as much primacy as the ownership of land in terms of protecting one from different kinds of, well, you know, one of the challenges with a deed restriction is that it can be missed in the title. And somebody might purchase a property without recognizing that the deed restriction is there. And that, in fact, is something that happened with a lot of inclusionary housing programs in the States that got started 20 and 25 years ago. That just somehow that was ignored or missed. However, that being said, if you're an active steward as an organization and you're monitoring and doing your enforcement role, deed restrictions can work just as well as ground leases, and they can, in fact, mirror or mimic almost all the same elements that are in a ground lease. So in a deed restriction, you would also want to define the period of affordability. You could define who are eligible buyers. So in our instance, because we do get funding from government agencies, for those homes where we have subsidy from government, we are limited to serving people below 80% of median income. In instances where we have no government funds, we have our own system where we test people's income and assets. And if they cannot purchase a home in the traditional market here, then they can buy from us. So you define eligible buyer in your lease or your deed restriction. And then I already referred to the importance of stewardship. As we've evolved in the States, we've come to understand more and more that, in fact, to mean what we say when we make a perpetual commitment, ongoing stewardship is just imperative. So another part of the package here that makes it all work is to have lenders who will make mortgage loans on ground leased land. And the ground lease as an instrument defines what is considered a permitted mortgage. And I think one of the things that we've got in the States that I'm not sure is a standard in Canada is the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And that, for instance, we actually don't allow variable rate mortgages on our leases so that we can be assured that that affordability will be perpetuated. And then we have, in our instance, a federal mortgage program run by the United States Department of Agriculture. It used to be called the Farmers Home Loan Program, but now it is a mortgage lending product for any rural community throughout the states. And it is targeted at very low and low income individuals who wish to purchase homes. And there are our Fannie Mae, which is one of the sort of general service, sort of quasi-public entities that is designed to purchase mortgages from banks so that banks can recapitalize. Fannie Mae has come up with we worked with, we the national CLT community, worked with and helped Fannie Mae design and adopt a standard rider that if it is on any ground lease, means that they will purchase from a bank that mortgage. So a lender like a Banner Bank, in this instance, who I have on this slide, can know that if they, instead of holding that mortgage loan in portfolio, want to be able to sell that to Fannie Mae so that they can make new loans, they can do that. So then we also have in the States, I've already mentioned the fact that we have a granting program called the Washington State Housing Trust Fund, and then we have another agency here called the Housing Finance Commission, and they have some mortgage products that help lower income homeowners. So another part of that stewardship role that I referred to is for the organization to maintain relationships with lenders so that when you have individuals come to you to purchase a home, they you know that you've got a lender that they can work with. So let's spend a little bit of time looking at how this actually works. This is an example of one of OPAL's homes. It was built in 1999. It's our second neighborhood. And it was resold in 2017. It's just a little over 1,100 square feet. And it's on a 5,200 square foot lot. Oops. So this is a page filled with numbers, and we're going to go through it just one at a time. So in the first box called House Profile, That's the same information you saw on the previous slide, except that it also includes the fact that it's a 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath house. When it was originally brought online, it cost us, the development cost, the second line in that development profile, cost us a little over $123,000, and it appraised at a fair market value of $125,000. We put subsidy in it of $18,000, and that was a mix of private and government funds, so that the price to the eligible homebuyer was just over $105,000. Now, in the next box down, labeled 1999 financing, you can see that the purchaser of that home got a mortgage at 7% for $875,000. Their share that they put into it was $2,500, and their monthly payment for principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and ground lease was $787, making that home affordable to a household of 3, earning 59% of the median income for the county. So then when that house sold in 2017 rather, the restricted price, the community land trust price, was $157,200, but the appraised value had shot up to $341,000. So now the value of the subsidy, i.e. the difference between the market value and the CLT restricted price, went from $18,000 to $183,800. So a 919% increase in the value of that subsidy. The homeowner took away almost $52,000 in cash, and the market value appreciation on the house was over $200,000. So in 2017, that resale restricted price, the home buyer had a mortgage at 3.5%. Interest rates had significantly changed. They put down just $1,000, and their monthly payment was actually less than the previous owner. And in fact, the house was affordable to somebody at a lower median income than the first time around. So this chart gives you sort of a snapshot of that phenomenon in many ways, but it is an aggregate of all of OPAL's sale prices over time compared to the market value of those same homes. So the green line is the resale restricted price. The red line is what the appraised fair market value was for those same homes. And the black line is the consumer price index. So we are doing a pretty good job of keeping the housing, our resale restricted CLT price rising at about the cost of inflation as compared to the roller coaster ride that is housing prices. And here's another chart that kind of looks very similar, but it tells a slightly different story. The blue line here shows the median house price for all of San Juan County, not just the CLT homes. And then the pinkish line shows you the price that is affordable for someone in San Juan County earning 80% of the median. So that's based on wages. For the most part, it's 80% of median, but it's basically that's a wage earning folks. And then the green line is what OPAL's median house price has been over, house prices have been over that same time. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the outcomes of what happens when folks sell their homes. This is an aggregate, an average of all of OPAL's resales, so 69 resales. And of that, in general, the initial investment of the home buyer was just over $1,300. They owned it for almost 6 years. When they sold, they had net cash of just over $15,000, which is a gain of, well, I won't go into all of that. They retired their principal, but the bottom piece is that they had an annual return, internal rate of return on their initial investment of $1,300 of 18.8%. So that's taking into account the fact that they owned it, they paid down on the mortgage, the increase in the price of the house. And if, for instance, that individual had been lucky enough to have a stable rental house and had instead put that $1,300 into investments that might have tracked with the Standard & Poor index of 500 index, they would have earned 2.35% per year over that same period of time. So what happens when folks sell their houses? In around the country, 52% buy in the traditional market. 29% go back to renting for a variety of different reasons. And 19% either die or have some other event, such as moving in with someone else, or there's a whole kind of range of things that happen to people. But I think the main message here is really that there is a significant number of folks in community land trust homes who use it as a stepping stone from renting to living in the community land trust to then buying in the traditional market. So it's important, I think, whenever you do work in the world, in particular with public funds, that you're clear about whether or not you're achieving your objectives. And so starting about 15 years ago, the Community Land Trust community, starting with Champlain Housing Trust in Vermont and then expanding to a more national level, engaged in a series of evaluations conducted by third-party folks, looking at the performance of the portfolios to see if community land trusts as a whole were in fact delivering on the promises that they made. And what these studies have found, ranging from all the way up to a study of a variety of different groups around the country done by the Urban Institute, is that community land trusts do in fact expand opportunities for home ownership, that it is a step to traditional home ownership, that it creates individual wealth in a way that continuing to rent rarely does, that folks are able to sell their CLT homes when they want to, that there is mobility, that they can take that wealth that they've gained and move on to something else. And at the same time, the community continues to have affordable housing that's available. And so the community as a whole is able to sustain that wealth within the community. It doesn't leave the community. There's over 200 community land trusts throughout the United States. I need to kind of slide my thing around so I can see things here, but and then I won't go into all the details on this, but I wanted to tell you that during the housing bust here, there was such a high foreclosure rate, and folks took advantage of that moment in time to do a series of surveys of what was happening in the world of community land trusts, and found actually that the rates of delinquency for community land trust homeowners was significantly lower than it was in the traditional marketplace. So the rates of delinquency in 2010 were 1.3% in community land trust homes compared to 8.57% in the marketplace. And then rates of foreclosure even lower, because the community land trust is there to backstop and help prevent that from happening. And the reasons cited for that are because of that homebuyer education up front, and even after somebody owns a home, and then continuing to play that role of steward. So community land trust, as I've said this perpetual word a few times, it's a very long time. And perpetual affordability occurs because we lower the price initially, we keep it lower at each resale, and that's paid forward from home buyer to home buyer. And one of the things that's been really gratifying for us to see is the number of CLT homeowners who, upon sale, take such pride in knowing that their opportunity that they were given to have access to an affordable home, that they get to pay it forward, that they didn't ride the marketplace up and then make it impossible for somebody behind them, but in fact, by participating in this form of marketplace, someone else will have the same chance that they did. And then on the flip side of perpetual affordability is perpetual responsibility, that the organization needs to understand that it's not just developing property and then leaving. As one of my colleagues in New Mexico said, we're the developer that never goes away. We need to make sure that we run an organization that is sustainable and that will be around to help homeowners succeed, to preserve that affordability, and to prevent the displacement of individuals from their homes and their community. So I'll close just by letting you know that if you want to come south of the border, there's a couple of opportunities for networking and connecting with folks in the community land trust world. We in the Northwest, being Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana, have a coalition, and we get together once a year in a usually kind of an informal setting to swap ideas and learn from one another. That's going to be all the way down in Bend, Oregon this year. And then our national conference, where that's more structured, has formal work sessions and has a really good track for beginners as well as intermediate and advanced folks. That'll be in Pittsburgh, October 1 through 4. And then finally, there's some resources where folks can look up more information. So I'll close with that, and thank you very much, and I look forward to questions when that time comes.